The world of podcasting was booming. From true crime to self-help, every niche had its voice, and among them stood Alex Reed, a rising star whose voice captivated millions. Alex wasn't just another podcaster. He was a phenomenon. With his deep, charismatic voice and uncanny ability to draw out his guests' secrets, his show, Unfiltered Truths, became a must-listen for those craving raw, honest conversations. 35, Alex seemed to have it all. A sleek, minimalist studio with state-of-the-art equipment, a growing list of sponsors, and a devoted fan base that hung on his every word. His podcast wasn't just about stories. It was about peeling back the layers of his guests to reveal their deepest truths. Whether it was a Hollywood star or an obscure author, everyone felt seen, understood, and valued in Alex's presence, or so they thought. But beneath the polished exterior and carefully curated image lay a man obsessed. Alex's charm masked a sinister fascination with control and power, something that had simmered beneath the surface for years. While the world saw a rising star, Alex saw his podcast as a stage, a place where he could play God, deciding who would rise and who would fall. Alex's journey into podcasting was as intriguing as his show. A former journalist, he had spent years chasing stories that no one else dared to touch. From war zones to corporate scandals, Alex had seen the darkest sides of humanity. But somewhere along the way, he grew disillusioned. The world didn't want the truth. They wanted entertainment. And so, Unfiltered Truths was born. A show that blurred the lines between truth and spectacle, all under the guise of authenticity. Each episode of Unfiltered Truths followed a pattern. An introduction to the guest, a deep dive into their life, and a climax where Alex would unearth something shocking. A secret, a confession, a moment of vulnerability that left listeners reeling. It was podcasting gold, and Alex was the alchemist. What no one knew was that Alex's obsession with his guests didn't end when the recording stopped. For him, the show was just the beginning. He had a private collection of tapes, unedited recordings that never made it to the public. These tapes were his treasures, filled with moments too raw, too dark, or too damning to share. They were his trophies, a reminder of the power he wielded over his unsuspecting guests. Alex's rise to fame wasn't without its challenges. Critics questioned his ethics, accusing him of exploiting his guests for ratings. But Alex always had an answer, delivered with his signature smirk. I don't exploit, I reveal. People crave authenticity, and that's what I give them. As the downloads soared and sponsorship deals rolled in, Alex began to crave something more. The podcast was no longer enough to satisfy his hunger for control. He wanted to push boundaries to see how far he could go before someone noticed. And so, he began to plan, meticulously, obsessively. It started small, manipulating his guests into sharing things they hadn't intended to, orchestrating moments that felt spontaneous but were anything but. But the thrill of these small victories faded quickly. Alex wanted more. He needed more. And with every episode of Unfiltered Truths, his plans grew darker, his obsessions deeper. By the end of the season, Alex Reed was no longer just a rising star in the world of podcasting. He was something far more dangerous, a man who saw his guests not as people, but as pieces in a game only he knew he was playing. And for his next move, Alex had something extraordinary planned. For Alex Reed, finding the perfect guest wasn't just about booking someone famous or controversial, it was about finding someone vulnerable. Vulnerability was the currency of his podcast, and Alex had a knack for sniffing it out. He'd scroll through social media profiles, listen to other podcasts, and watch obscure interviews, searching for individuals with stories that begged to be told or exploited. That's when he found her, Emily Carter. Emily was an aspiring writer with a growing online following. At 27, she had self-published a memoir detailing her struggles with mental health, her journey through addiction, and her eventual recovery. Her honesty resonated with thousands, and her posts often went viral. But beneath the polished Instagram photos and motivational captions, Alex saw something others didn't. A fragility hidden behind her brave facade. To Alex, Emily was the perfect guest. She was young, talented, and desperate for validation. Her story was raw, her emotions palpable. It was exactly the kind of content that would hook his audience. But more importantly, Alex knew she could be molded, manipulated. She would never see him coming. Alex reached out with his signature charm, sending her a carefully worded email. "Hi, Emily. I came across your memoir recently, and I have to say, it moved me deeply. Your courage and authenticity are exactly what the world needs right now. I would be honored to have you as a guest on my podcast, Unfiltered Truths. It's a platform where real stories like yours shine, and I believe your journey could inspire so many. Let me know if you're interested. I'd love to discuss further. Warm regards, Alex Reed." Emily replied within hours, her excitement palpable even through text. She'd been a fan of Alex's podcast for years and couldn't believe he wanted her on the show. For a writer struggling to break into the mainstream, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. The interview was scheduled for a week later. Alex meticulously prepared, reading Emily's memoir cover to cover, studying her interviews, and drafting questions that would draw her out. He wanted her to feel safe, to trust him completely, because trust was the key to breaking her down. When Emily arrived at the studio, she was exactly as Alex had imagined. Bright-eyed and eager, but with an air of nervousness she tried to mask with a confident smile. She wore a simple dress, clutching a copy of her memoir as if it were a shield. Alex greeted her warmly, his charisma disarming her almost instantly. The studio was designed to put guests at ease. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, and warm tones created an intimate atmosphere. But behind the scenes, Alex controlled every detail. Cameras were positioned to capture every micro-expression, every fleeting moment of hesitation. The recording equipment, sleek and state-of-the-art, ensured nothing was missed. The interview began like any other. Alex started with light, conversational questions about Emily's writing process and her inspirations. She relaxed as the conversation flowed, her nerves melting away under Alex's practiced empathy. But as the minutes ticked by, Alex began to steer the conversation into darker territory. He asked about her struggles with addiction, her lowest moments, and the trauma she described in her memoir. Emily hesitated, but Alex's gentle prodding and carefully chosen words encouraged her to open up. By the end of the recording, Emily had shared things she'd never intended to, memories she hadn't even included in her book. Alex watched her intently as she spoke, savoring every tear, every tremor in her voice. She was perfect, and she didn't even realize it. When the recording ended, Emily thanked Alex profusely, her voice thick with emotion. "I've never felt so understood," she said, her eyes shining with gratitude. This was cathartic. Alex smiled, his expression warm and reassuring. "That's what Unfiltered Truths is all about," he replied, giving people the space to be their authentic selves. But as Emily gathered her things and left the studio, Alex's smile faded. The interview had been a success, but it wasn't enough. He didn't just want Emily's story, he wanted all of her. She had no idea that the moment she walked into his studio, she had entered his web. As he replayed the recording that night, Alex began to plan his next move. Emily Carter wasn't just a guest. She was his next obsession. Emily Carter's episode of Unfiltered Truths became an instant hit. Alex's listeners flooded social media with praise, applauding Emily's vulnerability and Alex's ability to guide her through such an emotional conversation. Comments like, "This is podcasting at its finest," and "Emily's story broke my heart in the best way," flooded his platforms. For Alex, the accolades were satisfying, but they weren't what fueled him. It was Emily herself, the way she had bared her soul, her trust in him, her complete vulnerability. But now that the recording was done, Alex faced a dilemma. What came next? He couldn't simply move on to the next guest. Emily lingered in his mind, her voice echoing in the unedited tapes he listened to obsessively. For days, Alex played the episode on repeat, dissecting every word, every pause, every flicker of emotion. The thrill of control he felt during their interview wasn't enough. He needed more. That's when he made his first mistake. Emily had thanked Alex profusely after the recording, and as a gesture of goodwill, or so she thought, she accepted his invitation to a post-interview coffee. Alex had framed it as a chance to debrief and discuss the episode's release, but his true intentions were far darker. At the cafe, Emily was relaxed, her guard lowered after their emotional session. Alex kept the conversation casual, focusing on her future plans and offering advice about the publishing industry. He made her feel important, as if she were on the brink of something great. "You have a voice people need to hear," Alex said, leaning forward intently. "You could go far if you have the right people guiding you." Emily blushed, flattered by his attention. "Thank you. That really means a lot coming from you." But as the coffee date stretched on, Emily started to feel something off. Alex's gaze lingered a little too long. His questions veered into deeply personal territory, and his compliments felt too calculated. She brushed it off, chalking it up to his intense personality. After all, he was Alex Reed, the master of deep conversations. Maybe this was just how he connected with people. When they parted ways, Alex gave her an earnest smile. "Let's keep in touch, Emily. I see big things in your future." She nodded, grateful but eager to leave. There was something unsettling about the way he watched her walk away, like a predator watching its prey. Over the next few days, Emily tried to put the feeling out of her mind, focusing instead on the wave of new followers and opportunities pouring in after the podcast episode aired. She was being approached for interviews, speaking engagements, and even a potential book deal. It was everything she had dreamed of. But then the messages began. At first, they were innocent enough. Alex texted her to share feedback from listeners, congratulating her on the episode's success. But soon the tone shifted. He began sending late-night messages that felt too personal, too intimate. "I've been thinking about our conversation. You're unlike anyone I've ever interviewed. Listening to your voice again tonight. It's mesmerizing. I feel like I know you better than anyone else does. You're special, Emily." Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. The flattery that had once felt validating now felt suffocating. She started to distance herself, replying with short, polite responses or ignoring his messages altogether. But Alex didn't take the hint. If anything, her silence seemed to embolden him. One evening, Emily came home to find a package waiting on her doorstep. Inside was a hardcover copy of her own memoir, but with a chilling addition. Alex's handwritten notes scrawled in the margins. He had highlighted passages and left comments like, "This part broke my heart," and "I feel like this was written just for me." Emily's hands shook as she flipped through the book, her unease turning to fear. How did he even have her address? She hadn't given it to him. Alex, meanwhile, was oblivious to the line he had crossed. In his mind, Emily's reluctance was part of the game. He believed she was testing him, playing hard to get. The more she pulled away, the more determined he became to reel her back in. He began monitoring her social media obsessively, tracking her movements through posts and stories. When she stopped sharing personal updates, Alex grew restless. He needed a way to regain control. And then, he made his first critical mistake, showing up uninvited. One evening, Emily was startled by a knock at her apartment door. When she looked through the peephole, her stomach dropped. It was Alex, standing there with a confident smile, holding a bottle of wine. "Hey, Emily," he said when she hesitated to open the door. "I was in the area and thought I'd stop by. I figured we could celebrate your success." Emily's heart raced. "Alex, how did you know where I live?" His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "Oh, you mentioned the area during our coffee date. I just guessed." Emily didn't believe him, but she was too scared to confront him. "Now's not a good time," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm really busy." Alex's expression darkened. "Come on, Emily. After everything we've been through? I thought we were closer than that." Her fear turned to anger. "Alex, you need to leave. Now." For a moment, he just stood there, his eyes boring into hers. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Emily locked the door and immediately called a friend, her voice shaking as she recounted what had happened. She didn't know it yet, but Alex's obsession had just escalated, and his mistake would set off a chain of events that would spiral out of control. Alex's rejection at Emily's door didn't deter him. It fueled him. Her refusal wasn't a boundary to him. It was a challenge. In his warped mind, Emily was playing a role in a narrative only he could see. A story of resistance that would eventually turn into surrender. His obsession deepened. He spent hours dissecting every piece of content Emily had ever published, memorizing her words, her expressions, even her pauses. He created a wall in his private office filled with her photos, interview notes, and timelines of her life. A shrine to his fixation. Late at night, he sat in the glow of his computer screen, combing through her social media, analyzing every like and comment. He created fake accounts to follow her more closely, leaving cryptic, supportive messages she wouldn't recognize as his. Meanwhile, Emily grew increasingly anxious. She blocked Alex's number and made her accounts private, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed sinister, every unfamiliar face a potential threat. Her once bright world grew dim under the weight of fear. Unbeknownst to Emily, Alex wasn't just watching her online, he was following her in real life. He tracked her routine, her favorite cafe, her gym schedule, even the route she took on her evening runs. He justified it as research, a way to understand her better. But understanding wasn't what Alex wanted anymore. Control was, and he was willing to do whatever it took to have it. Emily's unease had grown unbearable. She confided in her close friend, Megan, who urged her to document everything strange that happened. Reluctantly, Emily began keeping a journal of Alex's behavior, the texts, the package, and his unannounced visit. She didn't know it yet, but those notes would soon become crucial evidence. Meanwhile, Alex's obsession blinded him to the mistakes he was making. The more he tried to control Emily's life, the more he left behind a trail of clues. He followed her to the gym one evening, unaware that security cameras had caught him lurking in the parking lot. His fake social media accounts, though carefully curated, shared patterns that connected them back to him, similar phrasing, timing, and even typos. One night, Emily returned home to find another package on her doorstep. This time, it contained a framed photo of her and Alex from their recording session, with a note that read, "We're perfect together. You'll see." Emily's blood ran cold. She knew Alex hadn't taken that photo. Someone else had, and Alex must have gone to great lengths to obtain it. Desperate for answers, Emily went to the police. At first, they were hesitant to act, chalking it up to an overly enthusiastic fan. But when Emily handed over her journal and the package, they started to take her fears seriously. The detectives combed through her evidence and uncovered Alex's online activity. The fake accounts, the obsessive messages, and his appearances on security footage began to paint a disturbing picture. Still, Alex remained oblivious to the net closing around him. He believed he was invincible, too clever to be caught. But his arrogance would prove to be his downfall. Each clue he left behind was another crack in his carefully constructed facade, and it was only a matter of time before his dark obsession would bring him face to face with the consequences of his actions. The police had seen cases like this before, obsession escalating into something far more sinister. Emily's journal, combined with Alex's online footprint and his uninvited appearances, provided a solid foundation for their investigation. But they needed more concrete evidence to ensure they could intervene before things took a darker turn. Detective Laura Hayes, assigned to Emily's case, quickly recognized the danger Alex posed. She spent hours analyzing the fake social media accounts and tracing their IP addresses. It didn't take long to link them to Alex's home. Hayes also pulled security footage from the gym parking lot and surrounding businesses near Emily's apartment, which showed Alex circling the area on multiple occasions. As they built their case, Detective Hayes interviewed Emily, asking her to recall every unsettling detail. Emily's fear was palpable, but so was her determination to stop Alex. "He's not going to stop," she said, her voice shaking. "I know he's planning something worse." Meanwhile, Alex remained oblivious to the investigation. His obsession had consumed him entirely. He spent his days rewatching Emily's episode of Unfiltered Truths and imagining scenarios where she finally understood his devotion. In his mind, they were already connected on a deeper level than anyone else could comprehend. But cracks were beginning to form in his perfect plan. One night, as Alex sat at his computer, composing yet another fake message to Emily, He noticed something odd. A shadow outside his window. Paranoia set in, but he dismissed it. He had no idea the police were watching his every move. Detective Hayes and her team monitored Alex's behavior closely. They placed him under discreet surveillance, waiting for the moment he would slip up again. They knew it was only a matter of time before his obsession would drive him to act, and they were determined to catch him in the act before Emily became his next victim. Alex's obsession with Emily had reached its breaking point. Despite his attempts to maintain the illusion of control, his behavior grew erratic. He couldn't stay away from her, both physically and digitally. The pressure of keeping up his facade while feeding his obsession was slowly unraveling him. One evening, Alex made his critical slip-up. Unable to resist the urge to see Emily, he decided to break into her apartment. He told himself it was harmless. He just needed to be close to her, to feel her presence. Under the cover of darkness, he picked the lock to her door, his gloved hands trembling with adrenaline. But Alex didn't realize Emily had installed a security camera after his last unannounced visit. The small device, hidden near the entrance, captured everything. His face, his movements, and even the unsettling calm with which he let himself in. Inside, Alex moved through her apartment like a ghost, running his fingers over her belongings, inhaling the scent of her perfume. He noticed a framed photo of Emily and her parents on a bookshelf and stared at it for what felt like an eternity. In his delusion, he imagined himself as part of her life, standing beside her in the photograph. What Alex didn't notice was Emily's neighbor, Mr. Bennett, watching him through the peephole of his own door. Bennett, an older man who rarely missed anything on their floor, had seen Alex linger suspiciously near Emily's apartment before. This time, he didn't hesitate. He called the police. Meanwhile, Alex made another mistake. As he rummaged through Emily's desk drawers, he knocked over her journal, the very one she had used to document his behavior. The sight of her detailed notes about him sent Alex into a frenzy. Her words were damning, painting him as a predator. His hands shook as he read her descriptions of his messages, his visits, his growing obsession. "She doesn't understand me," he muttered to himself. "She's twisting everything." But as panic set in, Alex didn't hear the approaching sirens or the soft knock on the apartment door. The police arrived within minutes of Mr. Bennett's call. Detective Hayes was leading the team, armed with the evidence they had painstakingly gathered. As officers surrounded the building, Hayes knocked on Emily's door, calling out loudly, "Police! We know you're inside, Alex. Step out now." Alex froze, the journal still in his hands. His perfect narrative was collapsing around him. He realized too late that he had underestimated Emily and the people protecting her. With nowhere to run, Alex stumbled toward the door, shaking as he opened it. The sight of Detective Hayes and her team waiting for him shattered his last shred of control. "You don't understand," Alex said desperately as officers handcuffed him. "She wanted this. She needs me." Detective Hayes looked him in the eye, her expression cold and unyielding. "You were wrong, Alex. And now it's over." Alex's arrest sent shockwaves through the community, especially among the devoted listeners of Unfiltered Truths. Many struggled to reconcile the charismatic podcaster they admired with the man now accused of stalking and breaking into his guest's home. The media swarmed the case, dubbing it the podcaster obsession trial. Emily, though still shaken, was determined to see Alex held accountable. With the support of Detective Hayes and her team, she agreed to testify in court. Her detailed journal, the security footage, and Alex's online activity formed a damning body of evidence. The trial began in a packed courtroom, with Alex's defense attempting to paint him as a misunderstood man whose actions were misguided affection. His lawyer argued that Alex had no history of violence and that his behavior, though troubling, didn't warrant the harsh portrayal he was receiving. But the prosecution dismantled this narrative piece by piece. They presented the security footage of Alex breaking into Emily's apartment, the journal entries documenting his escalating obsession, and screenshots of his fake social media accounts. Detective Hayes took the stand to explain how Alex's actions fit the profile of a dangerous stalker. Emily's testimony was the most powerful moment of the trial. She described the fear that had consumed her life, the sleepless nights, and the constant feeling of being watched. Her voice wavered as she recounted the moment she discovered Alex in her apartment through the security footage. "I trusted him," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He wasn't just a podcaster. He was someone I thought respected me and my story. But he violated that trust in the worst way possible." Alex sat silently throughout the trial, his once confident demeanor replaced by a vacant stare. When it was his turn to speak, he made a feeble attempt to justify his actions, claiming he just wanted to understand her better, but his words rang hollow against the overwhelming evidence. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Alex was found guilty of multiple charges, including stalking, unlawful entry, and attempted harassment. He was sentenced to several years in prison, with a restraining order ensuring he could never contact Emily again. For Emily, the verdict brought a sense of relief but also the realization that her life would never be the same. She moved to a new city, started therapy, and took a break from public appearances to heal. Despite the trauma, she vowed not to let Alex's actions define her. As for Alex, the man who once craved the spotlight now faced years of isolation. In prison, he became a forgotten figure, his podcast listeners moving on to other shows. His obsession, which had consumed and destroyed his life, was now just a cautionary tale. Emily eventually returned to podcasting, using her platform to raise awareness about stalking and the importance of speaking up. Her courage inspired many, turning her story of fear and survival into one of resilience and strength. And as the world moved on, the memory of Alex's dark obsession faded, except for those who knew the truth about the danger lurking behind the scenes.